Thank you, Marina.
Thank you.
All right, so I think without further ado, we'll kick this off. Today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity, but specifically we're going to be looking at not-for-profit organizations. So your organization's been hacked. What now? What do you do? What steps do you take, and how do you recover from that? So we'll be going into all of those aspects in today's call. Let's go to the first slide. So just a brief introduction of myself and Anisha. So I'm not going to read through the whole bio. Just a quick introduction of myself. I'm a PMP certified senior project manager with BDO. I've been with BDO for 12 years, and I've been with the cybersecurity group for a period of time as well, going through not only cyber assessments, but also working through presentations and just kind of cyber awareness training as well. Anisha?
Hi, everyone. I am Anisha Gupta. I am a senior consultant in the cybersecurity practice with BDO. We have been conducting cybersecurity assessments, privacy assessments, benchmarked against the industry's best standards like ISO 27001, GDPR, PIPEDA, etc. So I've also been involved in IT audits. So that's my overall role.
Okay. So if we go to the next slide. And we'll get into a little bit about how our presentation is structured this afternoon. Back? Oh, sorry. To the...
Sorry.
Okay. So we'll first get into indications of that you've been hacked. Essentially, we'll be looking at key markers for you to understand if, in fact, there has been an incident, and what do you do? How do you identify that incident? We'll get into an implementation of best practices and policies that you need to be aware of in order for you to navigate through incidents. And we'll touch on preventing cyber or future cyber attacks. So we'll go into different aspects of that and focus on different things that you can start on even today in order for you to prevent any future attacks. And we'll leave some time at the end of the presentation for questions. We're hoping we can get through everything within the time that we have you for. But what we want to do as well, though, is we want to be able to give you guys an opportunity. I know, Marina, we talked about this a little bit, where at the end of every section, maybe we can allow, if there are questions, we can allow a couple of questions to be addressed. But we'll see, we'll navigate through that as we go through the presentation. Okay, so let's start off, we'll start off with Anisha going through the first few slides.
Okay. So basically in this slide, we talk about the different kinds of incidents. So we've categorized the incidents into 5. The first one being information security. When I talk about information security, we can consider incidents like a password compromise and unauthorized access. For example, if a user gets unauthorized access to some confidential files and the confidential files are leaked out of your organization, that can be considered as an information security incident. Moving on to data breaches. When I talk about a data breach, it's a debatable topic. Some people consider data breach as good as any other information security incident or any organization information being leaked. But on this slide, we have categorized that as specifically for personal information, any leakage which is to do with personal information being leaked. When I say personal information, I mean your name, your age, your phone number, your address, your credit card information, etc. So any leakage of that information will be considered as data breach. Coming to operational incidents. Operational incidents can be fire incidents, can be natural disasters, can be frauds, can be theft, floods, medical incidents, and so on. Information technology incidents would be, for example, we can take a computer crashing down, an employee not being able to log into their system because they have been logged out due to multiple wrong attempts of the password. It can be an employee uploading something that is confidential from the organization into their Gmail account and sharing it with other people outside the network. Those can be considered as IT incidents. Coming to cybersecurity incidents are nothing but malware, ransomware, phishing attacks, SQL injection attacks, and the list is, you'll be able to see the list on the screen. We would be talking about those in detail as we go on, as we move on to the further slides. Okay, so the first one is malware. Now, when we talk about malware, malware is nothing but a hacker trying to insert a malicious code inside a system. So I thought it would be easier if I can explain this with an example. There was a malware attack on 11th October 2019, actually, which is a couple of days ago, in a hospital in West Alabama. So what happened was the computer systems were all infected with a malware, and the patient information in all the servers got encrypted. And it was difficult for the servers to communicate with each other. So what the malware does is it basically interrupts with your operations in the server, operations in your network. It basically disrupts all your services, whether be it a system or be it a server, be it network. There is an example of a malware that I'd like to emphasize on, which is called Zeus. What Zeus malware does is when any user is trying to say log into their banking website, once the malware is infected into this website, Zeus kind of steals the credentials while the user is entering the credentials to log into their account. So for example, if I'm trying to log in with my debit card or credit card number and my password into my banking account, Zeus malware will steal these credentials from the website, and that eventually leads to leakage of information. So that's one kind of malware that I wanted to introduce just for better understanding. Moving to ransomware. Ransomware is nothing but it's an attack where your system operations are interrupted and they are not resumed unless the organization which has been attacked has paid that desired ransom. So I would again like to highlight an example on this. The city of Stratford actually experienced a ransomware where all their servers went down. There were around 6 physical servers in the city and 2 virtual servers that were attacked by ransomware. And the city actually had to pay $75,000 to get their systems up and running. And it took them 10 days to get their systems up and running. So ransomware is nothing but something where you have to pay a ransom in order to get your systems up and running. The third one is phishing attacks. Phishing attacks is when you get a link with malware in your email and you unknowingly click on that link. So these phishing emails are very attractive. They can be emails about some discounts, some sales, and when you get these emails, they have some links, which are nothing but malware links. When you click on this link, you are redirected to a website, or your computer shuts down, or your screen goes blank. It's basically, the moment you click on that link, it's basically nothing but you've got hacked. And all your credentials or your information can be accessed by the hacker who will send that link. Phishing attacks have become quite common. In fact, as BDO, I can say we've been getting a lot of clients who've gone through a lot of phishing attacks. And yes, moving on to SQL injection attacks. Instead of going into the definition, actually, I would like to explain this through an example. So the Bell company was attacked by a SQL injection recently. There was a group of hackers named Null Crew that actually attacked Bell by identifying the vulnerabilities in their database. So the Bell actually has a SQL database where Null Crew was able to identify vulnerabilities and enter into the database. This database had around 2 million email addresses, 1,700 customer names, and telephone numbers that were leaked. So SQL injection is something where there is a malware that is basically injected through a SQL query into a database where there are vulnerabilities. And it's more to do with database and servers, where these SQL queries can be run. Cross-site scripting. Cross-site scripting is where a web page is replaced by the hacker and it looks very similar to the web page that the user is wanting to surf on. And I would take another example again of a banking website. So if a user is trying to enter his or her login credentials on a banking website, what the hacker does is the hacker replaces this website with another website. They run a script on another website and try to capture the confidential information like credentials. And the moment the user has entered the credentials, those credentials are stolen by the hacker because the script that is running on this new website captures the information and steals it. The next one is denial of service attacks. Denial of service attacks is somewhere where the hacker is trying to penetrate through your system, trying to inject malware, trying to inject virus and trojans, and just shutting down all your network services. Moving on to session hacks. This is a little technical. When a computer is trying to communicate with the server, there is a session that is created. There's a session that is built. So this can be something where a user is trying to enter his or her password to enter into a server. Now, the moment you're entering your password from a computer to log into a server, there is a session that is built. What the hacker tries to do is the hacker tries to hack this session where the user is trying to communicate through his computer with the server. The moment this session is hacked, the hacker again gets access to your server, can change your passwords, can access all the information that is present on your server. So this is typically called a session hack because that session is hacked temporarily for the hacker to make changes to the server. Password attack is where the hackers try to use permutations and combinations of your password, try to enter into your system using different combinations of password. This kind of attack is usually called brute force attack, where they have softwares and they have, it's kind of a program that they run in order to crack the correct password on your system. So the program automatically tries to use all the permutations and combinations and helps the hacker enter into the system. This is exactly why we have multi-factor authentication recommendations today. There are a lot of multi-factor mechanisms that are used to enter into the systems. When I say multi-factor, it is basically a combination of the password of your system and also a separate code that's generated on a separate device. So even if the hacker is able to enter your system through this brute force attack, is able to identify your password, they will have to have that other code that is generated on the other system to enter into your system. So this was all about the different kinds of cybersecurity incidents. I would now like Steve to continue.
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand what kind of incidents there are out there. But I think primarily the question that we were left with is, how do we know if we've been hacked? How do we know if there has actually been an incident? What do we need to look for? So these, we've got a few points here in terms of at least frequent markers, so you can understand exactly if there has in fact been an incident or if you're in any danger of a potential incident at this time. One of the key things that you'll notice is as you browse using whatever browser you typically use, you'll notice that you're getting frequent or random pop-up windows. And typically they'll be for things that you've never actually seen before, or it'll be pop-ups that website doesn't usually show. That's usually an indication that there is an incident in play there, or there's something on your machine that shouldn't be on your machine. You'll also get something in the form of an auto direct where you'll get directed to another site that, again, that you had not intended to go to, or it's an unwanted site that you've never been to. You'll get things like a moving mouse pointer, where the mouse is moving, but it's moving by itself. So you haven't done anything to trigger that movement, but it's moving. You'll get the antivirus program on your system shutting down. This will usually happen. You'll notice it's not always apparent to everyone that is using your system, their system. But if you went into your antivirus program and you notice that it has been shut down and you're having difficulty re-enabling it, this is usually a good indication that something is up. You'll get frequent crashes on your system, or even just performance issues where all of a sudden things are lagging and the computer itself is not performing at its usual pace. Usually this is an indication that something is up. And a ransomware message is pretty straightforward, where you'll notice that there has been a screen takeover, and you'll have a note that comes to you stating that there is a ransom for you to get that information back or get control back of your system. Right. So those are all key indicators that there is something happening. I think from a business perspective, you also need to understand what is the impact of a breach or any cyber incident. So we've got a few examples here and what the impact overall is from a business perspective. Loss of confidential or critical information, and this could be anything from organization-specific information, things that you've kept within the organization that shouldn't be shared. This is an indication of a data loss. You'll have an interruption of network services, system services, or business operations. So this is typically an issue where you have either your client or your internal staff is unable to access their network. This is usually a significant operational loss. Loss of financial data within or to the organization. So this is anything from credit card information, billing information, that sort of thing, which is indicated as a financial loss. Loss of personal information. This is an important one, and this is the one I think most people are familiar with nowadays. I'm sure every time you open a newspaper, whoever opens a newspaper anymore, or go online, you'll notice that there's usually an incident or two where someone has suffered a breach, whether it's Yahoo or whether it's a bank, a major bank. This is a key one because what usually happens is if there's a loss of personal information, whether it's employees or customers, there's a huge reputational impact. People lose trust in the organization as a result of that. And I think that for not-for-profit organizations, that is really a key point to note because donor information is very, 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 very important. And we want to make sure that we keep that as secure as possible. Cost of reconstitution or restoration of software. So anything that happens within the software realm where you have to replace or restore software, there is a cost associated with that as well. If there's a loss of intellectual property assets, loss of value, of intellectual property assets. This is typically if there is any IP within, let's say if you're a manufacturing company or a car company and you've got specific advantages in terms of how you design or how you implement certain things. Now that information is out into the general public, it'll usually result in a financial loss for you, not only the investment in you putting the time to implementing or creating this IP, but also your advantage in the marketplace is going to be lost as well. And then we have regulatory and legal costs for compensation occurred due to theft of information. So this is typically, if you're looking at something like GDPR or anything along the lines where there is a fine that's going to be levied to your organization as a result of that loss, this is typically what we consider a regulatory loss. Okay, now it is key for us to understand, because we are dealing with information here, what kinds of information we're dealing with, and each piece of information will have a different impact to the organization. One key exercise that we always encourage our clients to undertake is a data classification exercise where you understand not only what kind of data you have that you are keeping or that you're storing, but also where that data is stored and to be able to apply the necessary protection for the data depending on the priority. So the different kinds of data that can be breached is critical confidential information. So again, this is anything that's organization specific, whether it's pertaining to pricing, marketing, technology information, trade secrets. Personal information, again, as we said in the last slide, is a big one. So if you've got, whether it's your internal employees or customer information, such as name, age, address, bank account details, credit card details, anything of that nature, that is that should be really considered a high priority for all organizations. Financial information, such as credit card numbers or credit ratings, account balances, anything that your organization may use for billing, credit assessments, transactions, that sort of thing. Organization information is typically related to business strategies, but they are things that your organization does not necessarily want to be subject to public interest. Credentials like passwords and usernames for all network devices, database systems, mobile devices, assets, and then we have system configuration information, which is essentially configuration details that are related to network devices. So these are all very valuable information or classification of information that an organization might have, but they're not necessarily weighted equally across every organization. So you have to undertake the classification exercise yourself to understand where, if we have this information, how much do we value that information, and then ensure that the rights of security is been relegated to that information and where it's stored. Okay, so we're going to be moving on to the next section. I'm just looking at the time right now. It's 1:22. I don't know, Marina, if we have any questions that we wanted to take, or did we want to keep moving?
Let's keep moving, Steve. I think that might be best.
Thank you.
Okay. These are the different kind of security standards that you can see on the screen. There we have ISO 27001 and 27002, which is for cybersecurity. NIST again is a cybersecurity framework. We have PIPEDA and GDPR, which is for personal information. PCI DSS is for payments card information. It is more on the security and financial kind of compliance. HIPAA is for, again, personal information. It basically is personal information that is collected in healthcare organizations. And COVID-5 is an IT governance standard. So
I think just to add to that, when we talk about the different frameworks and practices, not all applies to every business. You don't have to necessarily get the Fort Knox of practices and policies that to apply to your business. It's a matter of making sure that you have the level of understanding to identify which one is specific, would be specifically helpful to your business and what you do as an organization. It helps to have someone within the organization that is able to identify the kind of data that you do have based on the line of business that you are participating in, so that you can identify which of these would be the best suited for you, right? Because you may not necessarily need to have the ISO framework or the GDPR. It really depends on the level of data and the level of security that you need to have for your organization. Okay.
Okay. Now moving on to the kind of best practices and in the implementation of best practices that we recommend. So when you've identified the kind of compliance that you want to go for, or the kind of security standard you want to benchmark your cybersecurity against, these are the different kind of assessments or the different kind of audits that you can carry out. One of them is internal security assessment. What we do in this is we look at your current cybersecurity controls that you have implemented in your organization. This again depends on the size of organization and the applicability of every cybersecurity control in your organization. So we take a few standards like NIST or ISO 27001, and we benchmark your current security framework against those standards. What we do is at the end, we identify gaps and we give you risk and recommendations as to how you can fully comply with an ISO 27001 or a NIST standard. So this is basically called as an internal security assessment. One may also call it as a cybersecurity current state assessment, because we are trying to understand the current maturity level of the controls that you have in your organization. A vendor risk management is something where there are a lot of organizations that deal with third parties. So, and there is definitely an exchange of confidential information between this parent organization and the third party. So what we do is we try to audit the third party and see if they have enough security controls to ensure that the information provided by the organization is secure and it's not going to be leaked through this third party. So this is called vendor risk management, where we are trying to assess the security of the vendor on behalf of the organization. The next one is BCP and disaster recovery process. BCP is business continuity process and disaster recovery process. Here we go in the organization and try to understand what their business continuity process looks like. What are the disaster recovery controls they have implemented in their framework. We also, again, we try to understand the gaps. We see if the organization has an emergency call tree. What is it? Do they have an off-site location which can be immediately set up if there is a disaster that has happened at the primary location? We go and test all these kind of parameters, and we give our recommendations accordingly. An application database security assessment is when we go and try to assess the security of an application. We run scans. This can also include identification of vulnerabilities of an application, like we were earlier talking about the SQL injection. What we try to understand is whether in a database security assessment, whether there is any possibility of a vulnerability that will help the SQL injection penetrate through and basically introduce a malicious code. A physical and environment security assessment is where we try to understand the physical access controls that are implemented. We see what kind of access employees have through the main doors of the organization. What is the kind of, if they have a biometric access, whether they have key fobs. We also look at the fire safety mechanisms. We see if the data center has enough security controls like CCTV cameras, humidity control, temperature control. This again depends on the size of the organization. So there are big organizations like banks which will have huge data centers, and there are also smaller organizations where they have server rooms within their premises. The last one is network security assessment. This is more about assessing whether everything is clean in your network, which can be done through vulnerability assessment and penetration tests. In vulnerability assessment, we basically try to scan all the systems, all the computers or laptops. We also try to run the scans on the servers and network devices to see if there are any vulnerabilities, if there are any loopholes through which the hackers can penetrate through your network. Penetration testing is again the next level of a vulnerability scan. In penetration test, we intrude into your system. We try to basically penetrate through your systems to see if we are successfully able to get through. And then we see if there are any controls that have to be implemented in order to avoid that. These are the basic kind of assessments that are carried out, again, based on the standards that were described in the previous slide. Moving on, now what is the end result of this assessment? Like I said earlier, we basically do a security analysis result. We try to identify the gaps, and we give a compliance ratio, which is nothing but the current maturity of the controls that are already implemented. Once we have identified the gaps, we also give the associated risks and recommendations. The second one is roadmap for improvement. There is also a roadmap that is created for identification of controls that have to be implemented in future. We try to give the recommendations looking at the size of the organization, looking at the investments the organization can make. We kind of give hard and soft controls for that. We also give, like I was mentioning earlier, we also give the pertaining risks for every gap that's been identified, and we give recommendations. I think I've already covered this. Moving forward,
okay.
Please.
Thank you, Nisha. So now we've gone through how do you know if you've been hacked. We've gone through different best practices and different things that you need to consider when trying to address an incident. Now we're going to get into the how do we prevent things. So from a preventative perspective, being proactive, there are a few things that we need to be mindful of. A lot of times what happens is when you've got an issue with a system, typically it's based on a vulnerability that can be prevented, and it's typically based on something that is the result of neglect. So one of the things that we're looking at here on this particular slide is just really being able to not only understand what your vulnerabilities are, but also manage your vulnerabilities. The process, the diagram that you see here is basically the vulnerability management process that we would recommend that we should all be doing. It starts with monitoring your vulnerabilities, and I think in all honesty, you should probably start with identifying where your vulnerabilities are. Monitoring those vulnerabilities, typically what you'd want to do as an organization, depending on the size of your organization, is you need to be able to have someone that's responsible for performing these activities, whether it's that person's sole responsibility or if it's one of the responsibilities that they have, whether they manage your IT or whether they are part of your administration staff. But you need to have someone that owns these activities. once you've got someone or a tool in place that is monitoring your vulnerabilities, there's a prioritization of vulnerabilities that must be done, and then you have to go through the exercise of selecting what relevant patches are required for those vulnerabilities. We need to test the patches and implement the patches. The patches should then be deployed to the production and ensure that the validation of the system has been upgraded. Ensure and validate that the system has been upgraded. But it's a cycle. It's not just a one-time exercise. You're going to have to do this on a regular basis. And the next couple of slides will get into that as far as what you need to do and what you need to be aware of to be more proactive versus reactive for these issues. So one of the things that we do discuss or we do look at as well is really understanding how you can mitigate the threat or mitigate risks for potential threats. So there are a few things that you need to do to be a little bit more proactive, to be ready. One being periodic assessments of the current security controls, meaning you need to be able to understand what security controls are in place and they need to be assessed, whether it's through regular audits or regular assessments, or just a matter of having the individual who's responsible for your security just verify that patches are in place. The next is real-time monitoring and process tools. So there are tools out there that you can employ as an organization that will definitely help to shoulder some of the load around the ownership of these items. A theme tool, for example, is a good example of a tool that an organization can use, but it depends on the size of the organization, right? You're going to have to do an assessment on your end as far as understanding exactly what is required from that perspective. Detective and preventative measures. So this is typically related to policies, processes, and procedures. It's really about making sure that you've got documentation in place so that the people in your organization understand exactly what should be done in different circumstances. A response strategy is important. Response strategy is typically something that you'd find, it's almost like an emergency preparedness program or plan that you'd have. It's in order for you to really understand if a situation does occur, what are the steps that we need to undertake to navigate through that situation, whether it's a breach or any other sort of incident that comes up. It's important to also test those strategies as well. Then there's also the risk assessment program, which really is helping to get top of mind any critical business processes and assets that you need to ensure have the necessary security in place. Okay, go to the next slide. Ultimately, I think any kind of proactive plan around managing cybersecurity, it starts with security awareness. And it starts with making sure that your employees are aware of all the things that they should be doing in order to protect the organization and its data. So part of this is developing a security awareness training for your employees. And this can be a formalized training that is offered by many vendors offer an actual opportunity for them to come on site and deliver the security awareness training. Or it could be something that is done online as well, remotely. Again, it's really dependent on the nature of your data and the size of your organization that will usually dictate the approach that you take with that. You also have to ensure that every new employee and current employee has undergone that security awareness training. So this comes back to a little bit around the policy and procedures. So your HR policy should include some education of security awareness for new employees and existing employees. You need to perform an incident awareness test to ensure all individuals in the organization perform their actions with efficiency. And this is what I alluded to in terms of really testing your response strategies. So an incident awareness test could be something as simple as sending out a phishing email as an example and just being aware of who is clicking and who is not clicking on those emails, because it allows you an opportunity to identify where training is still required. You need to develop a call tree or a list of, or at least a sequence of people that need to be contacted. You need to allocate responsibilities to stakeholders who should be contacted in an incident. It could be anywhere from the IT manager, if there is an IT manager in your organization, maybe you need to contact the CEO. It really depends on what your organization structure is. You need to create posters, flyers, screensavers, and other awareness materials to market the importance of incident reporting. So this is key because there's a lot of times where people within an organization may be a little bit embarrassed that they've clicked on something or that they've received something. We need to make sure that that stigma is not there, and they need to be aware, they need to be confident that they can report something because it's for the better of the organization, right? You need to be able to communicate as an organization, incident management policy and procedures, and a list of do's and don'ts. Ultimately, you need to make sure that your employees understand what they should be doing and what they should not be doing. This also can be tied into any policy documentation that needs to be established for that organization. Okay. This brings us to the end of our presentation. Now, I think now is a good time. We've got, I think, 22 minutes left. If we want to go through any questions, now is a good time for that.
That's great, Steve. Thank you. We do have quite a few questions coming in, so I'm glad that we have lots of time to deal with them all. So first of all, we've had a few folks asking, are there greater risks associated with different operating systems?
That's a good question. I think every operating system has its own risks, right? So I wouldn't say that there is one operating system that's safer than another. I know there's the premise out there that Mac is great because it doesn't have the vulnerabilities, let's say, that Windows has. But Mac itself, it's not impossible to hack a Mac operating system. So you're not bulletproof anywhere you go, right? I think each has their weaknesses and their strengths.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And on that note, we also had a question about folks that are using cloud-based applications such as G Suite. Do you have anything maybe that you could expand on in terms of systems like that?
So cloud-based applications are definitely, everyone is now migrating to cloud basically, and it's definitely more secure because it's a one-point go-to storage where there are not individual security controls that you have to implement, right? But there's one cloud where everything is being stored, and there are minimum security requirements for that because cloud in itself is quite well built when it comes to security with cybersecurity. So is there any specific question that you have related to cloud? Maybe we can answer that.
Yes, so we do have a question about it looks like how Google is backing up their G Suite program. I'm not entirely sure if that's a specific enough question for you, Anisha.
Okay.
No, it's not really specific as far as how they're backing up their program. But I mean, to Anisha's point, what cloud offers that an on-prem solution may not offer is they do have backup, they do have really robust redundancy in place, and they are always updated in terms of their patches for their security. So that's something that really takes the weight off the organization itself. They don't have to worry about having that check in place because that's done automatically through cloud. And it's the same with if you use anything aside from G Suite, if you're using anything in Azure, AWS, anything of that nature, usually you'll have similar levels of security in place, which are typically a little better than what you'd have on-prem, and that's really because the human interaction is not there, so it's automatically updated for you and backed up as well.
That's very helpful. Actually, I think that addresses quite a few of the questions that were coming in. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. So I'd like to move on into what to do if you have been hacked or you have had an incident. Do you have some tips that you can provide? Because we've had quite a few questions coming in about that, sort of like what are the first steps you should take if you notice that an incident has happened?
So I think I'll start off and then Anisha can jump in as well. I know we talked a little bit about it during the presentation, but the key here is making sure if there is an incident that you've actually confirmed to be an incident, that's communicated to the people within your organization that own that responsibility. Now, if it's a small organization and you don't have let's say an IT manager or security, an owner of the cybersecurity within your organization, then you need to make sure that there are steps in place within your organization to address that, right? And maybe Anisha, you can jump in.
There are a couple of other things that I would like to add. So one thing is it's very important to monitor the network logs. So usually whatever incident happens, it happens through the network, right? So if there is continuous monitoring, you would be well prepared. You would come to know instantly that there is going to be an attack because there would be something suspicious that's not going to be regular in your logs or in your network. So I think monitoring is the key to go. Also, there is something called an incident playbook. So what it's basically a document that is prepared by organizations to have, and that document has all kinds of incidents, potential incidents that can attack an organization of your size. And then it just helps the organization be prepared with all the preventive measures for each incident that is listed in that document. So an incident playbook is one thing, monitoring definitely, having an incident response team. Again, I'm going to piggyback on what Steve said, that it depends on the size of the organization. So the response team doesn't have to be like 20, 30 people, but it can also be 3 people. But having a team focusing just on incident management is really helpful.
Yeah. I think the key there is being proactive. It's the proactive nature of things, right? So going back to the monitoring of your network, typically you're not going to encounter an issue without some fingerprints that were there initially. There's always going to be attempts by some malicious force that is trying to access your network. Your logs will pick that up as that comes up, especially if it's a repeated attempt to get into the network. You'll be able to identify that very early and then take the necessary steps to address it. Awareness is also important as well. Making sure employees understand exactly what they need to do.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Awareness is actually, that is something that should be carried out during the induction. That's what we recommend usually, because once the employee is a part of the organization, then the first training that should be given is on security awareness, which should not only include incidents, but also your password management, the data protection, what internet websites should not be logged onto, etc. That's again the key. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like most things, being proactive is so important, but I also love what you were saying about having almost an emergency response plan, almost a critical incidents plan in place before something happens, which is such a great tip as well. Now,
and I think, Marina, just to that point, just to add to that, that's the incident playbook or the plan is really, the size of an organization doesn't matter. It could be a 2-person operation or it could be a major conglomerate. They should all have that incident playbook so that they know how to be able to address issues as they come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Now, Anisha, you mentioned password managers or password keepers. We had a couple of questions from folks asking about your thoughts on using those.
On using password keywords?
Keeper.
Keepers. Okay. Yes, I think so. There are 2 ways of looking at it, right? Definitely, these password tools are quite popular and they are really helpful because they try to manage all the passwords in this one component, right? In this one bucket, and that helps users from not writing their passwords in their systems locally or not trying to create easy passwords so that they can remember. So they can create complex passwords and they can put all their passwords in these buckets, I would say, or all these softwares or programs. But again, the other way of looking at it is that if there is an attack, if anyone gets a hang of these tools, all your passwords are leaked, unless the passwords are encrypted in this particular tool.
Yeah, which it should be.
Which it should be. So if these tools are encrypted, it's a really good way to go about it. But if these tools are not encrypted, then if anyone gets access to your password management tool, there's no way you can, save your information from being leaked, because the most important information is the authentication information, which has already gotten in hands of the hacker. So, but if it is an encrypted tool, it's a good way to keep your password safe. In fact, we have dealt with a couple of organizations that are actually using really good password management tools, and they really help. They help users keep complex passwords in these tools and in an encrypted format. So every time you want to access your password, you can just log into the tool, get your password, and then access whichever network device or whichever system you want to log on to.
Mm-hmm. That's really
Does
helpful.
that help?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you happen to have any examples of those, what those tools are, or should folks just be really focused on looking for the good encryption?
I can think of a few tools. I can think of Overwatch ID. There's Password Management Pro. There's also LastPass. These are the 3 examples on top of my head, which are good password management tools.
Wonderful. Thank you, Anisha. Okay, so how can folks stay proactive on all of this in a very rapidly changing environment? Are there some good places that they should be keeping an eye on to stay on top of things?
You mean as far as education, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, education, trends, anything like that.
I think I would still emphasize on awareness, because I feel that awareness is very important. I think the more aware your employees are, the better it is for the organization, because there are a lot of times when unintentionally people give out information which they're not supposed to, and it's not their fault because they don't know how confidential that information is or what the impact of leaking that information can be on the organization. I think I would still emphasize on awareness on, of course, there are so many cyber attacks that are happening every day, reading about it, trying to link those attacks to your organization, seeing if those attacks can be applicable or can be in relevance to the kind of operations your organization is running.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. Steve, do you have anything else to add?
I would just say I think ultimately, I mean, there are a lot of sites out there, and they pop up probably weekly. You'll see a new site that's really geared towards awareness around cybersecurity attacks and the different things that are out there that could threaten your data. But I think the key here is once you've got a good solid foundation in place within your network, so again, you've got monitoring tools in place and you understand exactly where things are from a security perspective with your patches. And again, to Anisha's point, the level of awareness within your organization so that employees know what they should and should not be sharing with people. I think that's 99% of your solution right there from a proactive perspective, right? It's just really making sure you're staying on top of those things. I don't necessarily think getting information from a site on a regular basis is going to help prevent a lot of the issues that you'll encounter if that foundation is not in place.
I would like to add something to what Steve said. So also, if you have regular assessments conducted in your organization, like if you have like cybersecurity assessments that are conducted annually, I think that just helps you, understand if how well your controls are, like how good they are in terms of security. So if you have an external firm trying to audit your cybersecurity controls, you know how effective they are and how applicable those controls are to your operations. So every audit will give you new recommendations and will give you a list of maybe new security controls, be it monitoring, be it incident management tools. So the moment you get that list, you try to understand that it's because there is something that's lacking in my network or my cybersecurity framework is why I have to implement this new control. And all of these cybersecurity assessments that are conducted every year, the kind of controls that you'll be getting, the list of controls that you'll be getting will definitely be up to date, right? So I think assessments is also a very important factor. To have regular cybersecurity assessments, have at least one vulnerability scan and one penetration test in your organization every year. that's the least. We actually recommend them twice a year, but at least once a year would really help, because that makes you understand the loopholes in your network. You can understand the points that are not secure enough and may allow the hackers to enter into your network, you know. So these are the three things I would focus on, like monitoring, as Steve mentioned, of course, the controls, the assessments, and awareness.
That's helpful. So we have a lot of smaller charities and nonprofits that are on the line today, and many of them are asking for some advice or tips on how a small organization can manage this IT security without breaking the bank.
You want to start?
Okay. Can you just repeat that for me, please?
Yes, for small organizations, how can they manage their IT security without breaking the bank?
Yeah, like a scale down lean approach. Yeah. I think, maybe I'll take a stab at it first. I think ultimately, if you as a small organization have a really good handle on not only what data you store or are using as part of your operations or day-to-day, whether it's donor information or what have you, starting with understanding what you have and starting to understand where that's stored and how you've protected that is the first step. I know a lot of smaller organizations will just kind of buy an out-of-the-box, off-the-shelf application or solution to use as their database. As long as you understand how that solution protects your data, that's the key. It's making sure you understand how your data currently is protected, right? Every organization should have in place some level of antivirus or monitoring solution that's in place as well. That's a key part of it. Ultimately, you're not really going to be able to really 100% protect yourself if you're not aware of what you have and where your data is and how it's currently being taken care of, right? If you have a vendor, a third-party vendor that you can use, they can share that information with you as well. You can contact them, and they should be able to share with you exactly how they not only back up your data, but protect your data and what they do in terms of their process around patching as well, right?
Yes, and to add to that, I would actually like to highlight something that Steve said during the presentation, which is data classification. If you are able to classify your data, if you're able to identify what is confidential and critical to you, then you have to worry about securing that. So once you've identified, like as Steve mentioned, the systems where this confidential data is residing, or be it even paper or files, or be it on servers, be it in your laptops, be it on some pen drives or external media drives. Once you're able to identify that confidential data is lying in these particular systems, all you have to worry about is securing those. And then comes the next step where you have to look at the kind of controls that you have to implement. So yes.
Yeah, I think for a small organization, a lot of what we're seeing right now doesn't necessarily cost anything. It costs time. You're going to need to have someone invest that time and really go through and understand the current state. But the key is understanding the current state, and then you can identify at that point in time if it's worth investing in having a cyber assessment done, or if it's worth investing in employing another tool that can provide the level of security that you need, right?
I can actually give an example of this as well. So like, for example, there is a data leakage prevention tool, which is a very expensive tool, and usually organizations want to implement that. What that tool does is monitor your emails, and it tries to identify if there is any information that is being sent in an email to someone who is not authorized to have that email. So maybe an email that is sent outside your organization's network with confidential information about your organization. Now, that tool is really effective because it tries to identify who has sent that email, what content has gone in that email, and who it has been sent to. But now I understand when small organizations do not want to invest this kind of money in a data leakage prevention tool, there are other soft controls like encrypting your email, or maybe marking it as confidential, or maybe not giving access to the confidential information to a lot of people and giving it to a limited set of people. So as he said, you may not want to invest a lot of money in it, but you have to invest your time. So that's some example that I could think of, which can maybe help you understand the difference between a big organization investing money in tools and small organizations investing time and effort, but making it as effective.
That's fantastic. I think those are excellent, excellent points. Last question for the day. We've had this come up from a few folks asking about if there's insurance that you can or should buy that's related to cyber crime.
Yes, there is cyber insurance that's available in the market. And in fact, we've seen a lot of organizations are going for cyber insurance lately. Yes, there is. The answer is yes.
Okay, so I think we're going to close it off there because I see we're running up on time. Thank you, Steve and Anisha, for presenting today. You've given us lots to think about here. Did you have any final comments before we sign off?
No, I think if you just move to the next slide, I think we have our contact information here as well. I know maybe there are some questions that are going to come up after the fact, so please feel free to contact either myself or Anisha with any questions that you might have. We're always willing to help and just ensure that you at least have an idea of where you need to start if you do have questions. We know cybersecurity is it's a massive topic, and the awareness around cybersecurity is blowing up exponentially daily. And there are so many questions about that. So please feel free to give us a shout if you do have any questions.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for making that contact information available. I'm sure there will be a few folks reaching out to you shortly. I just want to remind all of our attendees today that we are going to follow up with you by email this afternoon with the webinar recording and the slide deck. We will have a short survey there that will take less than 5 minutes for you to fill out. We hope that you will complete that for us if you can. You will have an opportunity there as well to let us know if there are topics you'd like to see covered in a future session. We'll be sure to share all of this feedback with Steve and Anisha as well. So if there's anything you'd like them to hear, please pop that into the survey. Our next free webinar is coming up on November 7th. We're going to be discussing how to create a strategic social media content plan. And we will include a link to register in the email that you will receive later today. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. I hope to see you on another webinar again soon. Thanks all.
Thank you.